Hello Ots, this is Friends, and I think you're wrong about the Judgement. The PTB for patch 10.1.0, the Chorus of Sin chapter, is here and there is a lot to love. Aurora and the Judgement have some really cool perks, the release skins are some of the best the game has ever seen, and artistically the Judgement's visuals, music etc. are a smash hit. Unfortunately, there doesn't seem to be any lore on the PTB, why? Why are you hiding the lore from me? Show me the lore, goddammit! But every meaningful Skull Merchant bug I'm aware of also got fixed, so that's pretty neat. That'll make that Grandmaster's Guide to Skull Merchant 2026 edition much easier to make. I'm also absolutely in love with the Judgement's power. It's incredibly skill expressive and plays unlike every other ranged killer and mid-range zoner in the game. But my appreciation for its power in all of its complexity and challenge is not what I would call universal among the community at large. A lot of people have expressed frustration at various elements of the killer, most notably their lethality at close range. When played in the intuitive fashion, the killer effectively has a minimum range due to how the vector targeting system works, and the small startup window where the beam of light can technically hit a survivor but not actually damage them until the damaging hitbox gets going, which does risk the killer winding up with a small player base or a difficult reception going forwards. This is where a certain Spanish man enters the picture, because Ots made a video on Monday, the day before the PTB, pushing for several changes to the Judgement aimed at lowering the barrier to entry for the killer and improving player feedback. I love Ots because I'm a human being born on planet Earth. I enormously respect everything he does for this game and its community, and I do recognise some of the issues that he points out in this video. But I think his proposed solutions have a couple of problems. At best, they're kind of mediocre solutions to the issues Ots highlights, and at worst, they're liable to create more issues than they solve, at least in my opinion. His concerns come from a good place. He wants newer players to have a good experience with this killer, which is noble. But I think there's a lot of problems in what he suggests. And frankly, I know what the DBD community is like. A big creator gives their opinion and people swarm it like piranhas, especially when that opinion dropped before the PTB even arrived and most folks could actually play it for themselves. That's why I'm making this video uncharacteristically close after my last one, because the sentiment has been spreading now that the PTB has dropped, and I feel like some public pushback and scrutiny is needed for these ideas, because I see a future where this could all go tumbling down. To put no finer point on it, I really like this killer and want to see them stay broadly the way they are, though there are definitely some improvements I would make. So welcome, friends and foes, survivors and killers, to the Judgement, and why I think Ots has missed a couple of things about them. I'm going to start by addressing Ots' first few points about the Judgement's ease of use that I agree a lot more with, because most of his points about the user feedback for the character do have some merit.
If you spawn a pillar 0.1 meters too close to the survivor, you're not going to get killer instant, they're not going to get hindered, you're not going to hear a sound effect. It will simply look as if you didn't do anything or if you miss completely. Even if you spawn a pillar from a far away distance and let it travel enough to do damage, sometimes you can miss by the smallest margin and it looks like you've been robbed. It feels so difficult to land this power. There is a brown add-on that gives you killer instant if you nearly miss your power. This should be base kit so that you know actually what is happening. And if you spawn your power too close to a survivor and it doesn't damage them but it goes through them, you should hear a sound effect letting you know that the way that you didn't hit is because you were too close, so that you know exactly what happened. On top of that, I think this killer could also benefit from an unknown style debuff. If you hit a survivor with your power, you damage them, great. But if you miss, or if you spawn it on top of them, maybe instead of doing nothing, the power could give them a nasty hinder, or a nasty hinder and the killer instinct. Something so that you know that you nearly miss, and to make the next hit a little easier, since this killer is 110, it probably wouldn't feel that oppressive.
I do think the feedback for using the power is pretty dire, especially if you don't get the hit, which combines with the delayed appearance of the damaging hitbox to make the user experience more awkward than it needs to be. To that end, Heretic's Mark based kit would be great as a little assistance to help players get information and land those hits, and I also like the idea of giving players a little bit of compensation if they technically do land a beam attack but hit them just a little bit too early to get the damaging hitbox online. However, I think Ots' solution of a hinder isn't quite what I would do. Unknown's hinder on a similar mechanic is actually quite useful sometimes, because Unknown is a 115 killer who generally fires pretty close to his target, and can follow up with an M1 fairly reliably. But Judgement is a 110 killer who regularly shoots and misses from far away, so what are they actually going to do with a hinder if they got it? Sell it on eBay? If you want to give Judgement something they can actually use as a near-miss benefit, why not give some out of Heresy instead? That wouldn't help in Chase specifically, but it does mean that you'd have the freedom to drop that Survivor if you wanted to, and recoup that time by making them repent at a shrine. And it would work with any Heresy-based add-ons like Confessor's Warhorn. Make it like half a bar or a third of a bar of Heresy. It doesn't need to be a full bar, just something that works with the Judgment's game plan, rather than a hinder that you're unlikely to even notice. One thing I think Otz is basically right on the money about is the post-firing cooldown of Divine Light. It is extremely long. You can fire the light beam and spend about 2.5 geological epochs in recovery after the fact, which combined with the fact that you're a 110 means that survivors have a bit too much wiggle room if they're close to you after the shot is fired.
When they're holding their power, you will realize that you're also pretty much invincible. At that distance, the power doesn't have enough space to actually damage you most of the time. Again, unless they do something crazy. And they are also completely unable to hit you with a basic attack for a very long time after using their power. Even if they cancel, they slow themselves down so much that you are completely safe.
But I think a shorter post-cast cooldown for Divine Light would go a long way to alleviating how Judgement feels at a very close range, without completely ramping how the killer plays. It wouldn't be a huge deal and doesn't need to be enormously shorter, but it would be nice, I think. That's not the only possible solution either. You could make the circle reticle move slower while you're winding the power up, and then make the maximum hold time for the power a bit longer accordingly, meaning the minimum range is effectively shorter because it travels out slower while charging. There are definitely numbers that you could adjust throughout the power that would make Judgement a bit more forgiving at close range without sacrificing their identity and core gameplay loop. And if you want to improve Judgment's lethality up close, this is how I would do it. Take a scalpel to the killer's numbers to smooth off some rough edges, instead of breaking out the chainsaw and just hacking away everywhere. The primary thing about Otz's video I take issue with is the idea of the brown add-on Prayer Kneeler becoming base kit, because that's a bad idea for so many reasons. Bit of context for you. Prayer Kneeler is a common add-on for the Judgement that causes the circular targeting reticle of Divine Light to effectively get stuck on the first object you crash it into. This makes the killer enormously easier to play, ensuring that you basically don't have to use a vector targeting system at all, since you're mostly just firing from the environment instead. This is particularly effective at close ranges, since you don't have to manipulate your camera so much to have the reticle stay near you, which Otz extols the virtue of in his video.
And another thing that I think they should really consider doing is making this brown add-on base kit. This brown add-on is not for everyone. For players that want to explore the full skill ceiling of this character, they probably don't want it. But it is an add-on that makes this killer 10 times simpler. Whenever you send your pillar and it hits an obstacle like a wall or a big rock, it actually stops. It doesn't keep going. And you don't have such an immediate pressure to fling it at someone because it needs to be flung very, very quickly normally. You can actually take your time to aim, and it feels a lot similar to other killers that already exist, like Artist Birds. When I used this add-on, it shocked me so much how much easier it was to play. In my opinion, maybe not for high-level players, but for the general audiences, if this add-on is not made base kit right now, this killer is going to be too difficult and it's going to be too inaccessible. They should make this add-on base kit and possibly add some kind of switch, some kind of flip where you can press left control, the active ability button, whatever, and make it so that you can enable and disable this functionality.
Otz does make some pretty solid arguments, but I'm going to start with the one that doesn't hold up to scrutiny at all. The console problem, or alleged console problem might be more accurate, because there's actually a very elegant solution that nobody's talking about, because console players don't play on the PTB, and it's one that Behaviour has actually publicised. Did you know that the Judgement has console-specific sensitivity options? This is our first killer-specific accessibility option ever. So if you're on console or play on controller on PC and are worried that you can't play this killer, I'd say wait until the live release when you can test it for yourself before making that claim. I'm getting early reports in from people who play on PC with controllers, and the early reception for the Judgement has honestly been better than I expected. Not everyone is a fan, but according to Moody Hughes here, Judgement might be the first killer they elect to play exclusively on controller, because they actually find it easier to aim the reticle with the sticks than it is with a mouse. And I've heard other console players saying that yes, while the Judgement is still a hard killer, these sensitivity features mean that the controller is not the source of that difficulty. But yeah, keep telling me that console players need their handheld to play the Judgement. Can I just say, by the way, that this whole, oh, the killer should be easy for everyone to play because the community voted for them, angle doesn't really hold up to me, in large part because you could justify making every killer release entirely brain-dead easy using that logic. At least with licensed chapters, behaviour does this on a regular basis. Oh no, we can't make Jason or Springtrap hard to play because it might alienate the new players coming for the license. But when an original comes out, like Frank Stone next year, I promise it'll be all, oh, we can't make Frank Stone hard to play because originals don't see play of licensed characters if their gameplay style is too niche. Just look at Twins and Krasue, you know? There will always be an argument you can make somewhere that a killer should be easy to pick up and play. So does that mean that we never get skill-expressive killers ever again? I mean, recent history indicates maybe so. If anything, I think there's a good argument that of all killers, the community killer should be a harder killer to play than average, who requires it more effort to really get into because the Grim War itself was such a labour of love and dedication. It was the result of a year of constant attention by the devs and community alike, and could easily be a celebration of the dedicated players who make this game what it is, who've stuck by the game for 10 years, and were far more likely to have voted in the Grim War polls than the randos who turned up for Five Nights at Freddy's or Jason and then left again after 3 months. What could be a more fitting celebration to the dedication of this game's community than a killer that required dedication and skill to play properly? It would even fit thematically for a character like the Judgement too. A major theme of the Judgement's character is tribulation, devotion, and reaching divinity through suffering and hard toil. So doesn't it make sense that learning the killer should ask that same devotion of the players who seek to revel in that divinity? Moving beyond semantics, however, I want to establish that Prayer Kneeler is not a harmless add-on. It is a playstyle shift, not a straight buff, and you can see this when you try to fire a beam sideways or at a longer range with the add-on equipped. On any map that isn't a totally flat plane, Prayer Kneeler acts as a severe range cap in many situations because once the reticle gets stuck to an object, it ain't going to get unstuck again without going through the lengthy power cancel and then re-aiming it again on open ground. And a big part of the power's notoriously long range comes from the capacity to place the reticle very far away from you. That's how you get the big global reach. And Prayer Kneeler severely handicaps your range on any map not named Rotten Fields. It's particularly pronounced on highly cluttered indoor maps like Hawkins, where your range is effectively halved, and that is a massive hit to the Judgement's fun factor, power, and long-range lethality. Alt makes this observation himself, that Judgement's lethality being higher at longer ranges is unusual among killers in the archetype, and Prayer Kneeler addresses that.
So for almost every single killer in the game, even the unknown, even the knight, you want to be as close as possible to the survivors, period. But then we have the Judgement, which as you can see has its own little roller coaster up and down graph. And what this means is that at a certain distance, your power is actually quite a useful thread. If you have a good line of sight of the survivor or auto reading on them through a wall, you can send your power. It's like a little slingshot that you aim, and there's a really good chance that you'll hit them. And even if you miss, it doesn't feel bad. It feels very similar to other existing powers like the Artist Birds. Completely fine. However, when the survivors are a little bit closer to you, you're going to slowly realize that it's almost impossible to hit them with your power in a direct, conventional way. Your power at a certain close distance doesn't work on the survivors because of things that we'll get into later, and it's very frustrating to come to this realization.
I agree with Ott's observation that this killer functions differently. I don't agree that that's a problem the way that Ott frames it as though. This killer is better at pressuring long ranges than almost any other killer in the game, and I don't mind that their weaknesses are unique to go alongside these unique strengths. If anything, sets them apart from prior killers and gives you a good reason to play them over Artist, or play Artist over them. I fear that may change if Prayer Kneeler becomes base kit, and we end up with a gameplay loop that's just power-crept Artist, similar to how players railed against Jason feeling like a power-crept Springtrap. Okay, but let's take the most charitable outlook here. Let's say it's not true base kit Prayer Kneeler, but a toggle like Ott suggested. Let's say you can choose when casting your power whether or not you want the Prayer Kneeler effect or not. If you wanted to actually down the survivor at close range, why would you ever not use it? Why would you ever try to flick with this character or do anything flashy in any circumstances other than literally just to style on someone? It becomes strictly suboptimal not to just use the Prayer Kneeler effect at close range, and that means that avenue of skill expression is functionally gone. I'm not just talking about 180 flicking, throwing your mouse across the room, so to speak. But also, you can fire sideways and kind of hit 90s instead by putting the beam sideways onto the survivor. You have to be more accurate with it because a perpendicular beam is easier to dodge than a parallel one, but it can be done, and it's less mechanically taxing than a straight up 180. But nobody will be trying 180s or even 90-degree perpendicular shots if there is a button there that you can press to just not have to do it. And that really, really sucks, because that's how a really unique and fun mechanic becomes obsolete. That's why a toggle doesn't really solve the problem, because if you give players an option to just shortcut the killer's mechanics, that's how you stop players engaging with those mechanics, and the actual fun and uniqueness of the killer drops off a cliff as a result. If you're someone who advocates for a base kit prayer kneeler toggle, I would ask you to watch clips like this. Or this. Or this. Got him. And ask yourself, do I want to see the Judgement players I play against trying to hit these kinds of cool shots, like, ever again? Because a base kit prayer kneeler, even on a toggle, makes these kind of things completely pointless to detrimental. And I want players to feel like trying to hit these shots is useful. Don't you? I mean, I can't control what other people run, and anybody who really wants prayer kneeler will just run the add-on anyway, but I think people should be encouraged to learn these more complicated interactions and should only fall back on the add-on if they really feel they have to, rather than just out of convenience. Thing is, there is a secret I want to share with you. If you want the add-on as a toggleable feature for the killer, that already exists. You can toggle prayer kneeler on or off in the lobby. It just costs 2,000 blood points. At the end of the day, the add-on exists for a reason. If you're someone who gets motion sick playing this killer and just can't flick behind you as part of your normal gameplay loop, or if you think it's too much of a hassle to learn and you want to play the killer without it, you can just run the add-on if it makes your life easier. Like, it's a good add-on, and it's a brown. It's very easily available. There's nothing wrong with dedicating an add-on slot to something like that. Just, please don't inflict that on everybody else. If you're someone who wants to just relax and play this killer casually without really bothering with the, close range skill expression, you can just put the add-on on because it's so easy to procure lots of them. And if you're someone who intends to play this killer so much that running out of this brown add-on is going to be a problem for you, I'm not trying to be funny here, but you probably should learn to use the power as intended if you're going to be playing the killer that much. Yes, it does mean that people who need prayer kneeler for motion sickness or other unavoidable reasons are effectively down add-on slots, but at the end of the day, the add-on more or less bypasses one of the killer's core mechanics. An intended part of their design that's part of what makes them special just gets to have a shortcut. Shouldn't that require an add-on slot? Is that not enough power and utility that being down an add-on is a reasonable cost to pay for that? And if not, where's base kit Cherry Blossom for Spirit so people with me who don't have functional ears can play the character? The way I see it, if players want to use the add-on to make their games easier, they should be able to do so. But if players want to level up their gameplay and engage fully with the power as intended, they should be encouraged to do that as well. And prayer kneeler base kit, whether it's a toggle or not, just shortcuts that journey and kills the experience and the joy of learning something new. Ott says in his video that Judgement is nothing like they've ever seen before, and that's why the killer must be changed. I say that the Judgement is nothing like you've ever seen before, and that should be celebrated and preserved where we can. There is nothing like the Judgement in modern day DBD, and I would be heartbroken to see that uniqueness homogenised. That is, of course, unless we were to get something like it to fill the void. In my previous video on the Judgement, I said that recycling the vector targeting system as a new way for the Skull Merchant to deploy her drones would be a really cool feature to add to her eventual rework. If you didn't see that video or need a reminder, I'll play the clip right now. I've just noticed something about the Judgement's vector targeting system. Don't you think the reticle kind of looks like a drone? You've got the skull there and the beam that comes out of it there. So, consider the following. When Merchant gets her rework, and I do mean when, this vector targeting system could be how you deploy her drones. You could pick the drone's placement and the beam direction in one movement in the same way that Judgement aims its pillar, and the drone could fly itself and sit there as a trap. This could work nicely even if you keep the drone the way it is, and could make laser tagging a more involved part of the power by letting you do it at a much longer range. Just want to highlight that designer Jeff is the mastermind behind the Judgement's power, but also seems to be in charge of the future of the Skull Merchant. So, Jeff, if you're looking for a way to build on Skull Merchant's existing gameplay without really changing the mechanics of the drones themselves at a baseline level, the innovation you've already made for the Judgement could be a nice place to start to look. So with that in mind, I would accept Prayer Kneeler becoming base kit for the Judgement, either, baseline or as a toggle, if and only if Skull Merchant was to inherit the full vector targeting system in her eventual rework, so that players who enjoy PTB Judgement, and there are a lot of us, can still get that experience on a different killer. To be clear, I still really don't want Prayer Kneeler base kit on Judgement, but at the end of the day, this is behaviour. Catering to the lowest common denominator is to be expected, especially when it comes to new killers. But they've clearly been at an impasse for a while about Merchant, and if Judgement was to get the Prayer Kneeler ice pick to the skull, then repurposing the full vector targeting system that we see on the PTB into a vector targeted drone deployment system, it would have numerous benefits. It would allow laser tagging and drone setup to be done at range. It would enhance Merchant's existing skill expression. It would more effectively deliver on her identity as a calculating mastermind commanding a network of drones. It would presumably save resources and time invested in the Merchant rework because it would recycle the existing system instead of building a new one. And it would allow players, like, me, who would mourn Judgement's mechanical flair from the PTB version going away, to still enjoy that gameplay on another killer, potentially drawing people to play Skull Merchant who previously wouldn't do so. That's a win, 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 win. That's 4 wins. That's so many wins. Merchant's drones need open space with no walls to be able to scan people, so a Prayer Kneeler type effect wouldn't work for her, since it would force drones to be shoved into walls which would cripple them. And there's no risk of alienating new players like there is with Judgement, because that would require new players to be invested in Merchant in the first place. You could have Eric Pope materialise in your living room and do your fucking taxes and her pick rate wouldn't crack 2%. We've tried an easy, accessible version of Merchant and it didn't work. So why not full send the other way and integrate one of the hardest to use mechanics we've ever added to a killer power? Vector targeted deployment. Bring back stealth mode to go with it, replace the hinder with the EMP dart from the second design preview, and season with number adjustments, quality of life, and add-on changes. Bish bash bosh. We got ourselves a rework. Don't get me wrong, I would rather still, Prayer Kneeler stayed in Judgment's add-on slot rather than the base kit, and even if it does stay as an add-on, Merchant recycling the system is still a viable choice for her rework. But if the add-on must become base kit in any capacity, I suggest that the resultant lobotomy of the Judgement becomes a brain transplant, and we can see the unique gameplay from Judgment's PTB self reincarnated into a killer who's been long overdue a revamp. I love the Judgement. I love the Judgement to death, but I'd be willing to sacrifice much of my enjoyment of that character if it meant making the Skull Merchant magnificent again, just like she should be. I should have known that any killer I found myself really liking would inevitably attract controversy and backlash, and possibly have something terrible happen to them because of it. It happened to the twins, it happened to the Skull Merchant, and it's reasonably likely to happen to the Judgement too. Sorry guys, the Pixel Bush curse might have struck again. If Prayer Kneeler becomes fully base kit, no toggle or anything, I wouldn't play this killer at all. It feels bad to use, it lowers the learning curve, which is a big reason that this killer is so cool, and it severely gimps the skill ceiling too because it caps your range so often. If it became a toggle, I might be more okay with it, if it wasn't on by default or anything. What I would really like is that, if there was a toggle, there was an option to disable it in the killer-specific settings alongside the sensitivity, so that I could ignore the mechanic completely and play the killer as intended. Then I'd be happy because there's no way this mechanic could ever interfere with my killer games ever again. If other people want to use it, it's no skin off my nose, but I do not want to engage with this mechanic. It is antithetical to everything I like about the Judgement, and if in any way I was forced to engage with it, I probably just wouldn't play the killer. I just want to emphasise here, I have no beef with Otz whatsoever. Again, he's an absolute gentleman, and getting to meet him in Montreal was a highlight of an already amazing trip. And if you find yourself in need of Prayer Kneeler to play this killer, I understand why you'd want it as available as possible. I don't, hate people with motion sickness or anything, but I worry that Otz's Judgement in this case, Judgement, is clouded by just how hot off the press this killer is, and how early everyone is in the learning process. And while I do understand the desire for Judgement not to be like Krasue 2.0, another underplayed, underloved shell of a killer, I think Otz has kind of missed why Krasue turned out the way she did. Krasue on her PTB was a modestly strong killer, but wasn't particularly well liked due to being clunky, unintuitive and awkward to play, so behaviour responded by showering her with buffs, and that made her stronger, smoother and easier to play. And that created a monster that ruled the game for a couple of weeks. Behaviour's actions had to be swift and decisive, nerfs followed quickly, and Krasue was left even clunkier than before. And between how awful she felt to play now, and the homogeneity of her power that meant there was no reason to play her over the other killers in her weight class, Krasue has been neglected ever since. The Judgement is also a modestly strong killer, but have been found by many to feel clunky, unintuitive and awkward to play, just like Krasue was on her PTB. Otz is suggesting buffs that make the killer stronger, easier, and more like other killers like Unknown or Artist, which he admits is his intention when suggesting these buffs. So we'll end up with a stronger, easier, and more homogenized version of the Judgement should these buffs happen and make it alive. Are we starting to see why I'm concerned yet? I worry that the Judgement's barrier to entry is being massively overstated, because the killer is so new and so unusual, and yes, is harder to pick up than any killer we've seen before, but hard and impossible for the average player are two very different things. And I fear in trying to solve the puzzle that is the Judgement too quickly, and ensure that 10-hour Timmy can pick them up in 4K on release day without reading the power description, the player base is going to push behaviour down a very dangerous path that will hurt the killer in the long run. I've seen it done before many times. It reminds me of every time you see survivors throwing a fit about killer counterplay more complicated than running to yellow and pre-dropping a pallet. Except this time it is killers doing it, and I've seen characters I love mutilated because of it. So I urge caution when giving feedback that might shape the future of the Judgement, because you might just get what you ask for, but not necessarily what you want. And if you think the killer is too hard for you, if you think that you just can't play the Judgement, all I can say is wait until live, because we are all bleeding here. Have faith.